The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Iowa Community of Practice. This is Jess Craho with the Iowa Coalition for Integration and Employment and a member of Iowa's Employment First Leadership Team. Again, thanks for joining us today. We're really excited about today's presentation. Before we get started, though, I'll take care of a couple housekeeping things. I want to thank the DD Council for their continued investment and support in the Iowa Community of Practice, as well as thank the Iowa Association of Community Providers for hosting us today and allowing us use of their platform. Thank you to our captioners from the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation, the Georgia Institute of Technology. If you need closed captioning to participate in today's webinar, I've placed the link in the chat, which you find in the control panel, usually along the right-hand side. You can ask any questions there, provide any feedback, and you'll also see that you can download handouts for today, including the updated discovery form and then the presentation Ashley will share with us today. I'll be sure to share the recording and the materials after the webinar, and I'll disseminate that through the mailing list. I think most folks that are on the call today are on the mailing list, but if you're not, please just shoot me an email and let me know, or if you have a team member that would like to join the mailing list, please reach out to me. You may also request a certificate of participation for ongoing education credits. Again, just shoot me an email and I'll be sure to provide that in the chat pod as well. But again, this is Jess Craho, so just email me directly at pruittjess@gmail.com. And then I'll ask you to please complete the follow-up survey or evaluation questions that launch right after the webinar. We really appreciate your feedback and participation in that. It always kind of shapes what we do going forward. And we really try to listen and incorporate all of your feedback. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ashley Lance with Griffin Hammis. Ashley's going to walk us through today. We're going to be focusing mostly on discovery and specifically discovery documentation. There's some new expectations and processes and communication touch points as it relates to the discovery service through VR. So we want to make sure that we review all that with everybody on the phone today. And Ashley will also provide us an overview of the discovery service with the home visit and then taking us to the discovery team meeting. So without further ado, Ashley Lance with Griffin Hammis. Thanks, Ash.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. It's good to be with everyone on this lovely rainy Tuesday. So thank you for carving out time. I know that everyone has 1,000 things on their to-do list, and carving out time to sit in and listen to a webinar takes a lot of time. So thank you for doing that. And I'm so appreciative of the Iowa Employment First team for inviting me back to continue the conversation about discovery. So let's go ahead and dive into today's content. So this is just a nice little handout that we created out of last year's Employment First project. Is kind of a flow of services around discovery specific to Iowa vocational rehabilitation and their discovery authorization. And so as you can see, the very foundation of this service really begins with visiting someone at their home, taking time to meet with someone in their environment. Yes, there will be that 1% that is not most comfortable at home, and you take that in stride. And the big thing to focus on is that you meet with the person where they are most comfortable and where they're in a position of power, as opposed to inviting them to your office to sit across from you at your desk, right? So it's about the job candidate and where they're most comfortable. So yes, there will be that 1%. However, if they do choose to meet or request someplace other than their home, I highly recommend making sure that that's part of your documentation and shared with counselors. So the visit to the home is our very foundation of the service. Then we move on to neighborhood visit, looking at what benefits or confirming what benefits that individual receives. And you can also get that information through the vocational rehabilitation counselor if you need to make a referral to assistive tech, those sort of things. And then we start getting into interviewing others. Then we touch base with VR, we move on to the discovery activities and wrap up the service with discovery dialogue. So we'll get into each of these components, but this is something we could also upload this and share as a printout as well. So you could print it out and post it somewhere if you want, or screenshot it, which is probably more realistic, and keep it in your phone, right? In the top left-hand corner, it gives you an estimate. And I want to be really clear that this is an estimate of how those hours might shake out. So the discovery authorization, the initial authorization is 12 hours of time. And so that home visit is probably going to take 1.5 hours to 2 hours. It certainly should be at least an hour. If it's less than an hour, I kind of question that a little bit, because I think it takes an hour to just really, kind of get into some good dialogue with somebody. So 1.5 hours to 2 hours. The neighborhood exploration and kind of mapping and that piece might take anywhere from 1/2 hour to an hour. So that's probably going to take the least amount of time out of the entire service. Interviewing others, depending on who you interview, the number of people you interview, and how long you chat with them, that could be anywhere from 1 hour to 3 hours, right? So again, these are just estimates. And then discovery activities is going to be the bulk of your time, which is also the hardest thing, right? And so we've built in some ways to brainstorm as a team as you get to that point. But the discovery activities are going to take the bulk of your time. So before I just want to talk about capturing discovery, because how we document the information really matters. And it matters because that's what the vocational rehabilitation counselor is reviewing to identify what steps are next, right? So if we don't spend adequate time capturing the information and the work that you've done, it really leaves the VR counselor wondering, okay, maybe this information doesn't register as new. Maybe it's something that they already know about the individual, and you also have all of this great information, but if it never made it on paper, that's really a disservice to you, the job candidate, and it doesn't give the VR counselor what they need as far as identifying the next steps of the services. So let's talk about documentation, really. So the big thing is we want to describe the service. We want to describe what we've learned about who this person is, paragraph form, like a story. And for a lot of us, that's kind of unlearning the very specifics of Medicaid documentation, right? Of Ashley went and saw this person at this address at this time. Here's how many times I prompted them. Here was the response. With discovery, we really want it to be a descriptive paragraph of, I met with Jess at her home. Here she, lives in a lovely area in the Des Moines community. She connects with her neighbors. She lives with her husband and her child. Her family lives next to her. So it's positive, and it's kind of a story about the job candidate, right? As opposed to, here's her diagnosis. Here are all the things that are wrong. So we want to start with descriptive paragraphs, right? And we also really want to focus on contributions and not deficits, which I know, is probably a reminder for many of you. So it's meant to be a positive document, right? So we're not focusing on barriers, but rather we're focusing on the supports and strategies to really ensure that this individual is successful. So that might be talking about their conditions of employment. We all have conditions of employment, right? So what are the things that we have to be successful on the job? And that's individualized for all of us. But we want to make sure that we're taking time to really describe what those things are. And then the contributions that the person brings, right? What stands out about this person? Did they greet you when you opened up the door and maybe they, welcomed you to their home? Some individuals I've met with have made me feel so comfortable in their space. And that's something worth documenting, right? Because that's a skill that they have, that they embody. And so also when we create these materials, it really helps us identify the next steps, right? And also to present the person's strengths. And then also just a quick reminder that as you're capturing the information, particularly around discovery activity, snapping some photos along the way, always check with your organization and their HIPAA rules and regulations, and how you should take pictures of someone with their permission, but how that also can be built into a visual resume or a portfolio down the road. So there are a couple of different points, and all of this information is pulled from a document that WINTAC created. And WINTAC is the organization that provides technical assistance to vocational rehabilitation agencies. And they came out with this document called the Essential Elements of Customized Employment for Universal Application. And in this, so the intent of this document is really that whenever or wherever you are providing discovery services, that these components are present. So this is kind of an overarching, whatever state you're in, that these pieces are present. So optimistically, descriptively, in a non-evaluative fashion or not comparative, and then in sufficient length. So we'll go into each of these categories. But again, you could Google WINTAC Essential Elements of Customized Employment for Universal Application, and this document will pop up. And it's, I think, I don't know, maybe like 10 pages long. So it's a nice lengthy document for you to refer to. So when it comes to capturing discovery, optimistically is a big piece, right? Because how we perceive and think about the job candidate and their family and their lives matters. How we perceive the individual impacts your documentation, believe it or not. How you write about the person, oftentimes our perceptions are seeping through. When we say that someone has a messy home, that's our perception of messy, right? So we have to be really careful about how we describe the environment, and we'll continue to talk about that and provide some examples as well. But I want to, if we can all, if you spend a minute before you go into someone's house and you just say to yourself, I'm going to go in and I'm going to be present, I'm going to be genuine, and I believe that this person can do anything, right? That doesn't mean that you have to have every answer of how that person can do anything, but you have to have the belief, right? We have to have the perception that this person has competencies and has the ability to learn new things, right? And that really changes how we write and how we see the person. So we have to, oftentimes, that requires us to leave our bias and our judgment at the door, because oftentimes you may be working in a community where you know that individual, or you've had experiences with the person before, or maybe your friend at work has worked with that person before, and you've heard stories about who this person is. And it's really easy to let our bias and our judgment cloud the perception of who that person is. So I challenge all of us, including myself, to really be present and wipe away any preconceived notions about who that person is and fill it with positivity and competency. Also, relying on previous information, right, can be really helpful, but also really dangerous. I've oftentimes shared a story where I made an awful mistake on the job, really assuming that this person had spent some time in the prison system and had received that he had been convicted for murdering somebody. And I had told myself all of these stories about who he was and what his story was, and little did I know that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was probably also wrongly convicted. And he was kind, he was a gentleman, he was thoughtful, and his story was just truly incredible. But we have to be careful on relying on that previous information, right? And take it with a grain of salt, because oftentimes the system that we work within has taught us to highlight all the negative things about somebody. So again, that's a pretty extreme example, but we have to be thoughtful, right, in relying on that previous information and how that has impacted our perception of who that person is. And again, I think the overall point of capturing information optimistically is that we want to assume all things are possible. And then we figure out the accommodation, right? Vocational rehabilitation has some phenomenal assistive tech experts. Eastern Seals has a phenomenal assistive tech program. We work as a team, right, to figure out what those accommodations can look like, and also can tap into experts throughout our state, right, that I think are oftentimes untapped resources. So assume everything's possible and then figure out the accommodation. We also want to capture the information descriptively. And I know that this can be hard because when we describe things in a really specific, thoughtful manner, oftentimes that takes more time. But I assure you that when we take more time to do so, the path for this job candidate can look a lot different because we're giving VR all of the information as opposed to just a snippet of the information. And we'll talk about some examples and how that might lead to different and creative ways to use the menu of services. But capturing the details really, really matters here. Capturing how someone completes something or their passion about something, right? So oftentimes when I'm reading discovery documents, I'll see lots of statements about who this person is. Jess is nice. Jess likes this. Where we really want to see the description, the detail, is what's the proof that Jess likes this or that Jess enjoys this? Well, here's a story to back that up. Here's an example. Or we know that Jess loves to travel because all in her home, we just see pictures of her and her family traveling all over the country. And she shares a story about each of these different pictures. And, you know, every couple of months, she's off on a trip somewhere. Right? So that's the type of detail in the description that we're looking for. So if any time that you're reading through your own documentation and you see a statement that says, Joe likes this, Joe enjoys this, you want to put an example or a description or a story of proof that that person really enjoys that. And then that can also help us start identifying some discovery activities down the road. Also, we want to describe the individual's life experiences, right? So that can also include past employment. And did they enjoy that? Did they really find joy out of that experience? Or maybe they didn't enjoy it. It could be their education, their life activities, skills, how they spend their day. Oftentimes, it's just asking the question of what do you have planned for today? And that can spur a conversation around, you know, what that person's been up to. But the big point is that we're not looking for checklists. We're not looking for bullet points. We want nice descriptive paragraphs about who this person is with some nice examples that back that up. And so the information, I should change that language because the positive personal profile no longer exists. So if that is news to you, again, the positive personal profile no longer exists. It's not part of the paperwork. But the information contained in the discovery document directs what comes next in the plan for employment. So what you put in the discovery documentation really guides the counselor as to what services should be authorized next. So if we only put bullet points about the person and say, you know, just like this, then that's going to take that person's employment path in a very different direction than spending time really describing who this person is. So here's some examples of being descriptive versus judgmental. So Alan liked the discovery activity. So the descriptive version would be Alan was up and ready to go for the potting activity. He brought his yard work gloves and was ready to go, right? He had a smile on his face. So that's the difference that I'm talking about, right? If Alan liked the potting activity, what about Alan told us that he was excited about that activity, that he enjoyed it, right? Pay attention. We oftentimes communicate way more non-verbally than we do verbally. So as you're supporting someone through those discovery activities, really pay attention to their non-verbals. Are they smiling? Are they, really getting into the activity? Or maybe they're sitting back in the corner and they're not participating. All of those things are communication, right? Another example, Alan preferred working with plants to the activity we did last week involving cars. So what that might look like is during the plant repotting activity, Alan stayed focused for 20 minutes as compared to the car activity where he only stayed focused for about 5 minutes, right? So it's not saying, well, Alan was, disengaged and uninterested and needed 25 prompts during the car activity, you can just say he was, compare it in the time, right? So we're being descriptive as opposed to being judgmental. Horticulture would be a good area to pursue for Alan, right? So that would be our perception, right? So the descriptive version might be Alan was able to repot 10 begonia plants during the 20 minutes he was there with minimal assistance. So, he's moving right along, right? He stayed focused for 20 minutes, he had a smile on his face, he was engaged in the activity. The descriptive column tells us a whole lot more about Alan and what he was doing as part of the activity. And then the last example, Alan was pleasant during the discovery activity. The descriptive version might read, he thanked the nursery owner and told him he would like to return to the nursery on another day, right? So we're really just spending time describing what we're seeing. Think of it as like a news story, or you're capturing the facts, right? As opposed to your perception, right? What was Alan's response? Did he have a smile on his face? Was he engaged, etc.? The other piece is we want to capture the information in a non-comparative, non-evaluative fashion. And I think this is difficult for all of us, me included. But it's got to be detailed and a comprehensive narrative that's really in sufficient length. So if you spent 2 hours in the home visit and you just type up a paragraph, I'm wondering what other conversation took place in that 2 hours, right? Because if I have 2 hours of service that I'm delivering, I want to capture that in at least 3 paragraphs, because hopefully I got a lot of rich information about who this person is and that time that we spent together. And also, our opinions don't answer the question, who is this person? Those are our opinions based on our experiences. So we really want to get to, who is this person? That is built by their experiences, the stories that they share with you, the pictures on their walls. If you think about your own home, and if you were to write about your own home, what do those walls tell you? What do the books on the shelves tell you about who this person is? How do they spend their day? We're really looking for, who is this person, right? And the bottom line, it's a conversation, not interrogation. So anytime that you are visiting someone in their home as part of the home visit, we don't want a standardized checklist of questions, right? Because then that changes it, because then it's not a conversation, it's a Q&A, right? And that changes somebody's comfort level in sharing information, because I just expect I give you an answer, you ask me a question, I give you an answer, and so on, right? But it's intended to be a conversation. When we think about meeting somebody for the first time, whether that's your friend, your spouse, your partner, your college roommate, did you go with a Q&A? Did you have a standardized set of questions that you were asking someone? Most of the time, no, right? It's a conversation. We find commonality. Sometimes that means sharing a little bit about ourselves to find some common rapport as well. And that's really the intent of discovery, is learning about someone in a more organic, meaningful way than a standardized Q&A, because it's intended to be a very individualized service for folks that may have struggle with competing with a standardized job description, right? So it's really intended to be a genuine conversation. And here is a quote from the WinTAC document, that care should really be taken to focus on the individual and avoid opinions of the facilitator, professional staff, family members, and others. And so I put this angry parent clip art to the side, because I think, one, I've been that angry family member, and it's really easy, I think, for all of us in the industry. I also am the job developer that places judgment on a family member too, right? And Jess and I's work with Margaret Lee Thompson, I always stick with her. She says, you never judge a parent because you've never walked in their shoes. And I catch myself often saying, ooh, that parent was a real stickler. But then I hold myself back and I say, wait, nope, I'm not judging that parent because I've never walked a day in their shoes. I don't know their story. But oftentimes that judgment of somebody's family, of somebody's parents, filters into our documentation and our perception of who that person is and what they can accomplish. So again, in everything that we do, we have to be really self-aware, right, of our own personal bias. And so that's just a reminder for all of us to really try and check that bias at the door. So lastly, what we put on paper informs those designing the plan for customizing a job or obtaining a wage job or for job development, right? So the discovery document should summarize information gathered in a way that identifies the strengths, needs, and interests of the employment seeker or job candidate, so it can inform those designing the plan for customizing or obtaining a job with the individual, right? So what we document matters. It drives where the service goes next. And if we don't capture that information, as an employment professional, it really does a disservice to you because you don't capture all of your hard work. So I really encourage you to spend the extra time capturing that information in a thoughtful, meaningful way that really highlights the contributions of the job seeker and helps drive the plan forward for what can come next. And we'll talk about some examples at the end of our time together. So we're going to breeze through each stage of discovery, and we're going to walk through VR's updated discovery document and what that documentation might look like or sound like. So as a recap, the home visit is the first step in discovery, right? It's our very foundation for the service. And the intent is that we're really learning about the person in an environment that they're comfortable in. They're at ease. It's an environment of their choosing, right? And then it's our first way to assess and really learn about who someone is, right? Because if we're going into somebody else's environment, think about when you go to the doctor's office or you meet with your banker or you're meeting with somebody for the first time in their space. Oftentimes, we're not relaxed. We're not comfortable, right? And so the very intent of meeting with someone at their home is to meet with them in a comfortable place. And this is where we're really gathering that initial information. And we also want to encourage the job candidate to invite others who know them at their best. And the little clip art of this squirrel with his acorn is really because when I think of the home visit, we're just collecting nuts. We're just collecting acorns. We're collecting information. You don't have to know where that information is going to take you. Meaning, as the employment professional, you don't have to then turn and say, here's the job that's going to fit Joe. You don't even know that information yet. The home visit, you're just collecting information, right? So just think of yourself as maybe an investigator, or not an investigator because that sounds too professional, but as a squirrel collecting nuts, right? As a friendly squirrel going in and collecting information. So I don't know how many of you got on the Marie Kondo bandwagon at the first of the year and watched Tidying Up on Netflix, but I spent watching a few episodes, and I think that there's something really interesting to take away from Marie Kondo, because as she went into all of these individuals' homes, they're inviting her into their home because they have an unorganized mess, and they want her assistance in going through their things and having a more organized, livable home. And so she could go in with a lot of judgment, right? She's the expert, she's the professional, she's there to tell them how to organize their home. And in every scenario, she goes in with joy. She goes in with optimism. She has a genuineness to her about being there and being present with the family and just really meeting them where they're at. And one of the things that she does in every family that she meets with is she spends time honoring their space. And so I'm not asking you to go in and do the exact thing that Marie Kondo is doing, right? Or certainly not placing judgment on somebody's mess, right? But the intent the piece that I want you to pay attention to that really resonated with me is honoring somebody's space and being present with them. And I think those are all pieces that we can take into the home visit and really be present with somebody. And when we do that, all of this information really can come at us, and we're at a place where we can absorb the information in, I think, a really genuine way. And so also, as a quick reminder, don't take in your notebook or pre-written questions. I know we talked about the pre-written questions, but even taking in a notebook and writing down as somebody's talking, that changes it to an interview, right? When we're having a conversation, if you have If you struggle with remembering things, you know, take in like a little 3x5 note card or note paper, and just kind of tuck it away on the side. But don't let it hinder your eye contact. Don't let it hinder the conversation. And I think when we go in with that openness, it really gets the conversation going. So also the neighborhood mapping piece. So this is kind of like, you know, maybe a half hour, but the intent is that job development really can start in the driveway. We oftentimes forget to really just spend time in where this person's neighborhood is, right? So maybe that's taking a neighborhood tour with the individual, walking around. Are their neighbors waving at them? Are they connected with their neighborhood? Or it might be the opposite, right? Where they don't feel comfortable in their neighborhood. And then this is something you're going to share and document. And you certainly don't want to make the job candidate feel uncomfortable. So that might look different in a scenario as well. But you want to take in the culture. What transportation is available in the area? You know, do they meet with their neighbor to have coffee on Tuesdays? Do they go to church with their neighbor? It might also include safety concerns. You're just really taking in anything and everything in a 5 to 10 mile radius around the person's home. So how might we document this? So if you go to Vocational Rehabilitation's website, under partners, under CRPs and paperwork or documentation, I'm sure Leanne will gladly type in the exact route for you to get there. But there's been some updates to the documentation for discovery services. And you'll see this initial part, visit B, to the home. So you're going to write who attended the home visit, their title, their role, who are they, and their contact information. And then we found that in the form it was fillable, but not necessarily expandable. So we're asking that you type up a Word document and label it Section 2, Part B, and attach that information with the form. So that also, by putting it in a Word document, gives you all sorts of room to document in really descriptive paragraphs. And then also, this is just a nice little tracking for you, the number of hours used. So then you would write, okay, we've used 2 hours on the initial home visit, right? So you're just going to attach a Word document with the form, and you'll identify on the Word document where at Part B, visit to the home, here's my documentation. Okay, we're going to move on to interviewing others. So after we complete the home visit and do neighborhood observations, we want to talk to other people who know this person well. Why do we interview folks who know somebody well? Because it gives us a bigger picture of who this person is. If you think about yourself, right, and you are asked the question, tell me a little bit about yourself, that's a really big question, isn't it? Like, you have to spend a minute thinking about, okay, what do I say? What are they looking for? However, if you talk to, and in our culture, particularly in Iowa, we're not really taught to boast about ourselves, right? However, parents, family members, our best friends, our spouses, all love to boast about you, right? And so we want to talk to other people who spend time with that person and get their perspective on who they are in a positive way, right? It's not to make a laundry list of all the things the person is bad at, but to really, even asking the question, you'll have some standard questions that you tuck away conversationally. But one that I find that always spurs really great conversation is, tell me a time when you are most proud of this individual. And that always gets a really nice story, 9 times out of 10, right? But the intent is to really get a bigger picture of who the person is and to fill in gaps from the home visit as well. So there might be, during the home visit, I share this example of one that during one of the projects in the past couple of years, we were participating in the home visit, and this individual's grandfather sat kind of in the corner, and he didn't say much during the home visit. But then at the very end of the home visit, it came out that this individual spends almost every weekend with Grandpa. And so that would be an example of, we want to talk to Grandpa to fill in gaps from the home visit, right? Because Grandpa was invited, he was there. Obviously, he's someone who means a lot to this individual because he was invited. But it doesn't come out until the very end that they spend time together every weekend tinkering in his garage. So 1, that could be a discovery activity. 2, I first want to talk to him and interview him to see his perspectives on who his grandson is, right? So it can help us fill in gaps from the home visit. Another example was a guy that we met with out in Utah. He spent time fixing Jeeps, and during the home visit, his dad wasn't there, and he would always talk about red Jeep, blue Jeep, red Jeep, blue Jeep, and we really weren't sure what that meant. And then we talked to his dad, and his dad said, oh, red Jeep, blue Jeep, we built these Jeeps basically from, like, I don't know anything about cars, but they were broken and they fixed them essentially, right? And there was a red one and a blue one, and he could memorize, or he had memorized, the red one versus the blue one and where the parts went and how those parts were different. And so that was red Jeep and blue Jeep, right? Which tells us a lot more about the person's skills. It tells us that, man, he has a solid memory to know all of those details, right? So it helps fill in the gaps. And to also really expand our perspective of who this person is. It helps us link the information. Also, it helps us identify reoccurring or emerging themes, right? And we're not going to talk about themes today because that could be a whole other webinar. But really, we're looking at what's reoccurring. That interest, that vocational theme might be around an interest or a passion in animals, an interest or a passion in working with our hands or woodworking. But interviewing others really helps us answer the question, who is this person? Who are folks you might talk to? Parents, grandparents, siblings, friends, teachers, doctors and therapists. I put that in there, but it has to be the recommendation of the job candidate, right? You wouldn't say, oh, I'd really like to talk to your therapist. That's really invasive. However, I've met folks who really insisted on their therapist being present because it was someone who knows them really, really well. So the job candidate identifies who you talk to. And at the end of the home visit, if you don't have an idea of who some of those folks might be, before you leave, you ask the question, is there anybody else I should talk to get to know more about you? And you could provide examples. So for instance, maybe they talk about their siblings. Would talking to Joe's siblings would they be able to help us learn more about who Joe is? Joe, are you okay if we talk to your siblings? So you're always checking in for permission and guidance from the job candidate. So really anyone who knows the person at their best and is a significant part of their life. And paid staff can also be part of that list, but just be aware that if it is paid staff, that they're paid to be there, right? So ideally you want to talk to people who are not just paid to be in the person's life, but for some folks, the reality is those might be the folks that know them best, right? So the big piece is it's a no judgment zone, right? And so throughout discovery, that's really, we're putting our own bias and our own judgment aside and really just capturing information, thinking again of the squirrel and pulling all this information together, and then we identify the next step. So again, we just want to find people who know the job candidate best and genuinely want to support their success and their employment. So that's the big piece too, in identifying who you interview. Folks that really want to see this person succeed and that know that their goal for employment is important. So at the end of interviewing others, you might be looking for patterns that are emerging. So again, that might be that Joe really has a passion for working with animals, and that's supported by his 5 dogs at home he cares for. It's supported by a story where he found a lost dog and got them connected to the ARL and reconnected with their owner. It tells us, so you're looking for something that is a pattern, right? Based on the stories and the information that you learn from the home visit. And then what information is consistent or new? Sometimes interviewing others will present new information that you didn't learn in the home visit. It might also just help elaborate, again, like the individual that I was telling you about the Jeeps. It can also help fill in those details and really tell us more about who that person is and their skills. And then lastly, it helps us really begin to translate and connect the information to identify emerging vocational themes or emerging interests. And then that really helps guide us to what meaningful discovery activities might come next. So what's learned through the home visit and interviewing others really guides where we go. So what might that documentation look like? So in part C, it says interviewing others. You're going to write down who you interviewed, their relationship and why, and then also set yourself a deadline. It's 12 hours. The intent of this service is really to be delivered in a time-limited manner. So 6 weeks, 8 weeks, I would say no more than 12 weeks. You want to make sure that you're moving along with discovery. So set yourself some deadlines. And then also you're just going to go back to that Word document, then type in section 2, part C. And I really, really encourage, I think it just helps the organization of the document. So for example, if we're going to talk to Jess's mom because she knows her really well and spends lots of time with her, and we're going to talk to her next week, then in my summary on the Word document, I'm going to put Jess's mom and her name, and then I'm going to type in all the information that I learned from Jess's mom. And then if we're going to talk to Jess's best friend, then I would put that information then following, right? So we're kind of organizing it by person because it also shows us, oh, this consistent information keeps popping up about Jess and who she is from all 3 people that I talked to, okay? So it's helpful to organize the information in that way. All right, let's keep moving along. All right, so this is my favorite part because you get to work as a team, right? So if we go back to the form real quick, there's this stop. After you have completed the home visit and completed interviewing others, it asks you to stop and send the information that you've pulled together thus far. Also, make sure that you're documenting as you go, right? Because if you're not taking in notes, you want to capture that information as soon as you leave from the home visit. So you want to capture that information, send the Word document and the form to your VR counselor with proposed recommendations for discovery activities. And the intent of this touch point is really to also brainstorm as a team. So you might not know what discovery activities are going to come next because maybe you just don't have enough information or you're new at this whole discovery thing. The intent is that you can also brainstorm with the counselor, right? So it's not intended to be a negative thing. It's to share, here's the information I've collected so far, and here's what I'm hoping my next steps are, or what are your thoughts, or can you help connect me with someone in this vocational interest area? So we want to propose discovery activities based on the information to date. Things that the counselor might be looking for is the discovery activity that you propose should be supported by your documentation. So if you put in that you want to see Joe interact with his 5 dogs and take care of his 5 dogs on a daily routine, so maybe that's in the mornings or the afternoon, we would want to see that documentation of, here, Joe is passionate about animals, here are the reasons why, here's the discovery activity that supports or is going to help learn more about Joe and the skills that he has with animals, if that makes sense. So they're going to be looking for, does the documentation support the proposed discovery activities? On both ends, from VR as well as from the provider perspective, that we're all open and willing to accept ideas and collaborate. The intent of the touch point is really to work as a team and say, how can we brainstorm discovery activities together? Because discovery activities are hard. And we'll talk about those here in just a few minutes. So again, the intent is really to touch base as a team. So let's talk about discoveries and put your creative hat on. So the intent of discovery activities is really that the activities are going to tell you more about who this person is, right? And so we want them to be task-based. So that means that the individual, the job candidate, is active in the process. They're doing something as part of this activity. They're not observing, they're getting their hands dirty. They're part of it, right? So if that's making a meal from scratch, they're making the meal, right? Maybe with your support, but they've picked out the recipe. Maybe the recipe is something that they've never made, and you're taking in the information of how they're completing the activity, right? So it's task-based. It's meaningful, meaning it has to have meaning to the job candidate. If it's something that doesn't have meaning, it's not going to give you an accurate reflection of their interest or their skills, right? And so for some folks who may have limited life experiences, you're going to have to you might have to just try out some discovery activities based on information that they've shared with you, but you also might learn that they're really not interested in it, like the car activity in the example versus planting and the car activity, right? But it has to be meaningful for the job candidate. And then the other piece is we want it to be judgment-free. So again, you can see that's consistent throughout the discovery service, that we're really being judgment-free. We're observing and taking in information without judgment. So here are some examples, because I think when you're first coming up with discovery activities, our mind goes to going versus doing. So I would say things that are not discovery activities are in a worksite facility or in day hab, because oftentimes those activities may be predetermined and are for a group of people, right? So the activity should be individualized. Going to the movies. Going to the movies really doesn't tell me anything other than the person likes going to the movies, right? Sitting next to them watching a movie, I'm not really learning a whole lot more about who they are. Going to the mall, again, unless I'm meeting with their coffee group, who they meet with every Tuesday, who knows them well, mall walking is not going to be a discovery activity. Going to the grocery store, unless it's tied to a specific discovery activity. So examples of discovery activities might be making homemade pizzas or cookies. And again, that would be based on their interest of cooking or culinary, right? It could be tinkering with a car. So for the guy that worked on Jeeps, I might take him out to a pick and pull and let him tinker with the car, you know, because I want to see him work with his hands. I want to see him in an area where he has interest and passion. It could be taking care of your chickens, right? If somebody has chickens or pets or animals, it could be caring for those animals. It could be attending a family or a social gathering where the job candidate has specific responsibilities. Maybe they get together with their family every Sunday afternoon and they're responsible for making a side dish, right? So, or they're responsible for getting everybody together and sending out the family email. That would be a discovery activity, right? So the purpose of the activity is what you learn from the home visit and from interviewing others drive what type of discovery activities you identify. And on the VR form, there's some great questions that I recommend asking yourself as you identify discovery activities. So one, what are you hoping to learn? What's the point of the proposed activity? Is the activity task-based? So are you seeing the person in action? Is it meaningful, not just enjoyable? And is the activity free of judgment? So jobs in the person's area of interest won't automatically be eliminated if they can't perform during a certain discovery activity. So again, just helpful questions. They're on the form. Spend some time kind of ruminating on those as you decide or propose discovery activities. In the form, it's going to ask you, these are examples, Grandpa's Woodshop and the Volunteering for Habitat for Humanity. So you just want to identify the discovery activity, with whom you're completing, by when, because we're always setting deadlines for ourselves, and a brief justification. And then after you complete the discovery activity, you're going to go back to that Word document, label Grandpa's Woodshop or whatever the discovery activity is, type up everything you learned, add pictures if you can. It gives so much context when we can add pictures of the individual in action. And then you would label Habitat for Humanity. Here's what we learned. So at least 2 to 3 discovery activities. It's going to depend on how many hours you have left. So it's going to look different for everybody. And discovery activities could also be an additional webinar. So we're not going to, we're just kind of breezing through. All right, so the last part is pulling it all together. So you're going to set your discovery team meeting, and it's going to be completed as a team, right? So the counselor has to be there. I often say whoever attended the home visit should also be invited back. And you want to encourage the job candidate to invite family, friends, whoever wants to support their employment goal. Because schedules fill up so quickly, I highly, highly recommend that you set the date for your discovery team dialogue meeting during the home visit. Set it out, 6-7 weeks later so that it's already on everybody's calendar, including the VR counselor who needs to be there. So you're taking everything that you've learned from the discovery service and you're capturing all of that information to identify what steps come next. So the feel of this meeting is going to be very similar to the home visit. It's going to be comfortable. Oftentimes it may take place at the person's home. We say it feels like a pizza party. That doesn't mean it's a pizza party. For some, it might be, but that it's conversational, right? And it may take place on the evening or weekend if that's when everybody in the team can get together. Again, it's maybe an hour or two in length, and it's really a nice way to brainstorm what comes next for the job candidate. So the last form that you're going to fill out really is kind of a summary of things that you've learned. So we start off with number one. What are the needs and conditions and the supports necessary that you've learned about the individual? So maybe a condition for employment is an extended break time because they have a person who assists them during mealtime and for restroom breaks. So the support necessary is going to be that their CDAC provider can come in. The condition or the need is an abbreviated or an extended break time, right? It's a condition of employment. Their skills and contributions. This is where you get to brag on this individual about all the great things that you've learned about who they are, right? And so that's going to get populated in from what you've learned about during the discovery activities, their contributions that you've learned about through the home visit and interviewing others. Maybe this person just has a really infectious attitude and a fantastic smile. That can be a contribution, right? And if the skill is making the person, whoever is in the room with them, feel really important and recognized, okay? Tasks observed or performed. So again, that's going to be populated by your discovery activities that you've completed. What tasks see this person perform, and what career possibilities might you explore? That doesn't mean it's the have to, but when you think about somebody completing the task of, let's say, working with animals, what are the career possibilities that they might explore, right? And you may not know the answers to that yet. Maybe it is completing a job shadow at various places that you find other people who enjoy animals, right? So that's going to look different. And then step 4, identifying next steps for continued employment service. You get to leave this blank because this is identified at the meeting as far as what's going to come next. And so we're going to talk about a couple examples and then hopefully have time for questions. So anyway, yes, you leave step 4 blank, you fill that out during the meeting, and then if the CRP, you would go back, type it in, send complete discovery documentation to the counselor when you're done. All right, so here are some examples. So building authorizations, what might that look like? And all of these have been approved by the lovely Leanne Russo. So know that they've been vetted through VR. So first, you might authorize discovery. And as a result of discovery, you need further exploration before confirming the vocational goal or theme, right? So this might mean, we'll look at the example here in a second. So additional authorization might be made for career exploration. And so maybe that's to help the individual complete one or more informational interviews in a certain area. Based on what you learn in career exploration, then you might authorize job development or customized employment. So here's an example. In discovery, we learned that Joe recently graduated. He enjoys woodworking. He completed that in high school. We talked to, in interviewing others, we talked to his instructor from high school, and he raved about Joe's woodworking skills. He said he was spot on, you know, he was meticulous in his woodwork, but he's really unsure of the types of careers that are available. So then you might use that career exploration authorization to go and complete some informational interviews. So that might be talking to an interior design friend that the VR counselor said, oh, I know that they work with carpenters. Here, go talk to my interior designer friend. And then you get connected to finished carpenters through that interior designer. And you go and you talk to the finished carpenters who are working on various projects in people's home, doing finite woodworking. And then you might also talk to a furniture restoration company and a construction company, right? So all of these folks are connected to people who work with their hands and complete woodworking projects, right? And they get paid to do it. However, you're using the career exploration to really dive in and say, tell me about the work you do. You might also identify some unmet needs, and maybe then that leads to the job development authorization or customized employment based on what you've learned from the informational interviews. Job development the job developer identified an unmet need at the furniture restoration store, and you move into furthering job development. Okay. Next example. All right, so again, discovery proves that you need further exploration before really confirming that vocational goal. So you use career exploration to complete some informational interviews to confirm a vocational path. Then maybe you use a community worksite assessment where the job seeker needs an opportunity to get his hands dirty, try the job out, and then you move to job development. So let's look at the example. This job seeker is interested in cosplay, which is when someone dresses up as like a costume, is a character that might be in I'm thinking like a comic strip, right? And so this person is interested in cosplay and supporting others and gaming, right? So that ever popular gaming that we oftentimes hear about for young population. So we get career exploration authorized to help us dive into learning more about these areas of interest. So maybe we talk to a cosplay designer because those folks are out there. Let's talk to them. We might talk to a fabric store, which the cosplay designer refers us to because that's where they get their fabric from. We might talk to a recreational therapist who helps others in a nurse in an aging facility to spend time doing recreational activities. So that would be tied to his interest in supporting others. And then maybe we talk to an app developer or a mascot company when it comes to cosplay and gaming. The community worksite assessment, maybe we identify, based on the career exploration work that we did, we identify an unmet need with the recreational therapist working one-on-one with residents. So we do the community worksite assessment with the recreational therapist. And then we move into job development, where the vocational goal is to work in a long-term care facility, completing work in the recreational therapy department. Another example, this time we still complete discovery, but we have some unanswered questions about who this person is. And we leave discovery saying, oh, I'm not really sure what's next. Or maybe those discovery activities that you completed, because this individual has limited life experiences and is just unsure of what they like or what they might enjoy. And the discovery activities that you complete in the first round of discovery maybe are not spot on. So you might request a second round of discovery, which is possible. You're not going to go back and do the home visit. However, you're using that second round to complete additional discovery activities. And so then, based on those additional discovery activities, you learn more about who the person is. You might then use the community worksite assessment and move into job development or customized employment. So let's look at this last example. The parent oftentimes spoke over the job seeker during the home visit, and Pete really enjoyed, what we took away from it is that he really enjoyed working with his hands. We observed him complete chores at home and an activity to change a tire, which he was really uninterested in. So we really needed more information about who Pete is. So we set up we asked for a second round of discovery. We set up a one-on-one meeting with Pete, and then we completed additional discovery activities based on the new information that we learned in our one-on-one meeting. And so we found out that he oftentimes will sneak away to the neighbors, and he helps him with powder coating because his neighbor has a self-employment business powder coating in his garage. So based on that information, we set up a community worksite assessment at a manufacturing plant that was maybe a connection from the vocational rehabilitation counselor, and we have a referral from, a referral comes from the neighbors to connect with the manufacturing plant to apply his skills. Based on the community worksite assessment, an opportunity opens up for long-term placement. So at that point, you wouldn't get the job development authorization, you would just move straight to job coaching because essentially the development was done through the community worksite assessment. So just some creative approaches. It's also possible that you learn enough in discovery in that 12 hours where the job candidate is spot on as far as, yes, I'm really passionate about animals. I have all these skills in working with animals, and you move straight to job development to focus on a career where they're working with animals, right? So that's also possible. I just didn't include that because I knew our time was going to be short. So questions for you to think about. What are you going to take with you today? And any time that you're sitting and listening for an extended period of time, hopefully you've jotted down one thing where maybe you want to apply that in your work. And then what do you still need to know more about through the community of practice? We're always looking for new topics, new ideas. So if there's things that you want to know more about, maybe that's discovery activities, maybe that's really diving down deep into using the menu of services in a creative way. So what do you still need to know more about? And we'd love to hear that information from you. And you could either put that in the chat box or just write it down privately for yourself to know more information. So feel free to reach out to me and to Jess, who is also helping us at Griffin Hammett. So, and any of your discovery needs. So thank you again. And I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but maybe one or two.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah.
Agree. Yes, I think we have a couple minutes for questions here. And while we do that, I will again remind folks that we'll share the recording from today along with the materials, but you can download them directly here right now, including the PowerPoint and the discovery form. But again, I'll be sure to send those out. The follow-up survey or evaluation will launch right after the webinar, and that might be a great place to share with us some of your takeaways from today and things that you'll be applying in the weeks to come. I got a question here from Leanne Russo. In the scenario of a person moving from a workplace readiness assessment directly to employment, a CRP would be eligible for the IVRS business incentive payment of $66.12 at the job offer, and then another $198.36 if they remain employed for 90 days. Thank you, Leanne. So more.
Awesome. Thanks, Leanne.
A nice reminder
to add that in there.
Right, of that business incentive payment. Thank you, Leanne. If you have any questions, as Ashley said, please feel free to email them to us, or you can share them again in the evaluation also, and we'll be sure to get back to you. I want to invite you and remind you about the June Community of Practice on the 18th from 1 to 2 p.m. and we'll be hosting Carrie Osterhaus with the Iowa Department for the Blind VR Agency. Carrie's going to talk to us about ways that providers specifically can partner with the Department for the Blind to offer employment services to low vision and blind job seekers, including discovery services, along with pre-ETs to students. So please come back in June to hear more about that. Again, I know the department's really looking to partner with the CRPs across the state in the delivery of those collaborative employment services. It is at the same time as National AFSI, so that'll be interesting for those trying to attend both. But again, we'll be back June 18th. If you need a certificate for your participation today, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to get that to you as soon as I can. And I think if we don't have any other questions or comments, we'll go for today and wish everybody to stay as dry as possible. Thanks again, Ashley.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Brita. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in June.